In this final video on the Web of Science, we're going to see how you can use it as a tool to help you become an expert on a given topic. To see how, let's jump back to where we're looking at the Sapochnik paper on the impact of the neighborhood built environment, the physical characteristics of the neighborhood on children's behavior. And notice that the Web of Science tells us that this paper has been cited 18 times. Now, you also notice that 18 is a clickable link, and if we click on that link, it will take us to a list of those 18 articles that cited this study. But before we do that, why would we want to look at the subsequent articles that cited this one? I mean, we know it was cited 18 times. Isn't that enough? Well, let's say that you've read the study or looked at the abstract and you're thinking, yeah, I'm interested in the neighborhood environment. I think that neighborhoods matter and can influence how children or adults or old people feel or behave or develop. Now, you could think, well, that's nice, and just leave it at that and go back to whatever it was that you were doing before you looked at the paper. Or you could take it up a notch. Bam! Reading one study is like reading the first chapter in a book. You might read it and be, well, this is kind of boring, and set the book aside and forget about it. But if it's something that you're interested in, don't you want to know what happens next? I mean, how does it evolve? What happens to the characters, the ideas, the story? Well, that's where tools like the Web of Science can help. It helps you fill in the rest of the research story. In this case, Jose and the team had ideas. We found some patterns, some observations. But what happened next? One way of seeing where this story leads is to follow the publication trail. You start with one paper, then you look at all of the studies that cited that paper. It's like reading chapter 2 in a book. Did others follow up and find the same thing? Or maybe they didn't see anything. Maybe nobody ever followed up with the idea and there's no citations and the whole thing just kind of evaporated. That happens sometimes. Or maybe subsequent researchers dug into it further and identified specific key features of the neighborhood that had the largest impact. Or maybe they followed up and found that the neighborhood environment has a larger role for some kids in some environments, but less of an impact for other kids in other settings. Or maybe it's a bigger deal for certain types of behavior. In the story of our research idea, what happened next? Now, that's where that list of articles that cite this study takes us. That's what happens next to this idea, all right? Let's take a look. If we click on the link for the citations, we're taken to a list of all of the articles that cited our original study. Now, notice it's saying that there's only 17, and that happens sometimes. The numbers may change a little bit as you go through the process. For example, the algorithms may recognize that there's a citation out there, but it doesn't have enough information to specifically nail down what the article is. So it wants to count it, but then later on it can't give you a list that includes it. So this sort of thing happens sometimes. Don't worry about it. Just go with the flow. Let's kind of scroll through these and see what we found. Here's the studies that cited our original paper. Here's one, evaluating the effects of active morning commutes on students' overall daily walking activity in Singapore. So kind of looking at walking, physical activity, kind of based on in that physical environment in Singapore. That might be something that's kind of interesting, looking at children in a very different social, cultural, political environment. Kind of how does the physical environment influence their behavior and activity. So that might be something I'm interested in if I'm interested in the original Jose study. Let's keep scrolling down. Let's see what we find. Here's one. The impact of housing design factors on children's conduct at school, an empirical study of Hong Kong. Of Hong Kong. That looks pretty similar to ours, right? It's looking at the housing design and conduct at school. That looks pretty close. If I'm interested in how the built environment worked in our study in Miami, I might wonder if they found the same thing on the other side of the planet. Pretty cool. Now, to kind of use a different analogy for all this, you can think of these citations, right, the papers that cited our paper. You can think of these citations as taking you from that initial seed of the original study to all the subsequent studies that kind of grew out of that seed. Now, of course, I know these studies had lots of other influences beyond our paper, but it gives you kind of that next generation, the next wave of research of how the ideas have evolved. It's the chapter 2 in our novel of our research. What happened next? Now, you can probably guess where I'm going next with this idea, right? Why stop here? Why not do the exact same thing with these articles? We can see how many times each of them were cited. There's 6 citations of this one, 120 of commercial density and residential concentration and crime. Ooh, that could be interesting. So we can see how many times each of those were cited. We could take the next step, look at that third generation of studies that cited the ones that cited the original study and take a look at them. It's like reading chapter 3 in the story of that research idea. Now, of course, some of the articles that are citing our original study are probably not relevant. As I was going through them quickly, there is one about statistical analyses and pointed to the approach we used in our study, cross-classified hierarchical linear modeling. Unless you're a stats geek, you may not care about that statistical paper. So you don't want to go down every rabbit hole. Focus on the articles that are expanding on that original theme in which you're interested and keep moving forward in time to see how the research and our understanding has evolved. Now, you can even go backwards if you want. For example, you may want to look at the references used in these papers, right? These papers that cited our original study. Who else did they cite? We know, for example, this study in Hong Kong cited our paper, but they cited 25 other things as well with 26 references, right? Maybe I want to know about some of those papers. What were they thinking? What inspiration did those researchers draw on from those other studies? Because those other papers that they've cited may be, at least some of them, may be addressing similar topics or similar ideas that we had. Again, I wonder what they were thinking, what they were looking at, right? Now, before wrapping up, we access this by looking for an article and then selecting the citations for that article. Now, you can also do this more directly from the Web of Science homepage, right? Let's take a quick look. So at the Web of Science homepage, instead of picking documents or authors, we're going to select cited references. That then gives us a few options for generating a list of citations. So we come over here to this drop-down list and we see the options. Notice for every option of doing the search for your source, it gives you some description of what it means by a cited work or years or volume. In our case, we're going to go down to the bottom. Let's stick with the title. So we'll do cited title, and I'm going to go back to the impact of built environment on children, right? And I click the search, and sure enough, it takes us back to that short list of articles that we've seen before. We then scroll down till we find the Sapochnik paper. Up there it is right there. And I check the box next to it, right? So I check that box. And then if I come up to the top, I click the See Results. And we're right back to that list of all of the articles that cited that paper of Jose's. Now, alternatively, we can go back. I'm going to get rid of that. And we can go back here, all the way back. Come on, there we go. And instead of doing the title, let's pick cited author. Now, that's clearly not Jose's name, so let's delete that. And we'll type in Sapochnik, right? And then we'll search under his name. And now we see all of the papers that Jose's authored. Now, we could go through and find that specific paper that we've been working with, or even better, we can select several of his publications by just checking more than one box. And, maybe you want to select all of his papers that have talked about the built environment. And then once you've selected all of the papers, whether it's one or whether it's several, again, maybe all the ones about the built environment, you can come up here, click See Results, and it'll generate a single list of citations for all of those papers that you've got, kind of all in one nice list. Pretty handy. So the idea is to follow that thread of an idea through different lines of research. You'll see different new researchers pick up the idea and run with it. At some point, you'll start to see more and more articles in your list citing other articles in your list. And that tells you that you're really starting to wrap your head around that topic. I mean, this is exciting stuff, and I hope it inspires you. Don't just sit and read one paper and stop. Follow the story, follow the thread of the research. This is how you become an expert. If you do this, you become the person who understands that topic area, okay? Let's wrap things up here, all right? Take care. I'll see you in future videos. Bye-bye.